Welcome back to Let's Analyze Silent Hill 2. As you can tell from the spoiler warnings, we will be discussing both the original game, released in 2001, as well as the remake, released in 2024. Today, we'll be discussing doppelgangers. So first, let's define what a doppelganger is, because there are multiple definitions. Doppelganger comes from German, and it roughly translates to double goer or double walker. There's sort of three definitions you might come across when you're researching doppelgangers. There's a physical double, which is the most simple, mundane explanation for a doppelganger. So in the simplest terms, this is a person who looks almost identical or identical to another person. Usually there's no biological relation. There's no reason why they should look alike. There is the supernatural entity. So in folklore and mythology, a doppelganger is often a ghostly or paranormal apparition of a person. It's often perceived as an omen of bad luck, illness, or death, especially when someone sees their own doppelganger. There is also a psychological explanation, or psychological founding in this, in literature and psychology, doppelganger can symbolize the duality of human nature, or the conflict between one's true self and a hidden persona. Silent Hill 2 uses doppelganger figures, such as Maria and Pyramid Head specifically, to depict James's internal struggle with guilt, repressed desires, and denial over his role in Mary's death. Maria is far more than a mere figment of James's imagination. She is a manifestation of his guilt, a twisted reflection of his deceased wife, Mary. Maria first appears to have a striking resemblance to Mary. However, her personality is quite different. While Mary was gentle and submissive, Maria is bold and assertive. The contrast highlights the idealized version of Mary that James carries within him. Maria represents the woman he wished Mary could have been, a woman who would reciprocate his desires and fulfill his fantasies. Maria, as the original game's DLC title suggests, is, quote, born from a wish. She is the version of Mary that James wishes he had. However, since Mary is a delusion, she also serves to distract him from realizing the truth that James himself murdered Mary. This distraction is handled differently in the 2001 and 2024 games. For example, when James first meets Mary in the 2001 version of Silent Hill 2, he says that he and Mary's special place might have been the hotel on the lake, which is in fact true and is the location where the climax of the game takes place. Maria teases him for this and makes an innuendo about their special place being a hotel. The distraction here is a light attempt at a joke, more friendly, and ultimately Maria agrees to travel with him to the hotel, but the game itself has obstacles to prevent the player from immediately heading to the hotel. Maria's initial distraction is subtle. She is initially presented as a source of comfort and companionship for James, offering him solace amidst the horrors of Silent Hill. In the 2024 remake, upon first meeting Maria, James does not remember that the hotel on the lake was Mary's special place. Instead, he stares into the fog and visibly struggles, trying to recall what might have been Mary's special place. Before he can remember this, Maria distracts him, suggesting that she knows a place where, quote, two lovers might have visited. She takes him to a small garden where there's a statue of a woman. Maria tells James the story of this woman. She was condemned to stay on an island, but her beloved rode to her every night, guided by the woman's candle on the shore. One night, Maria tells James, there was a storm, and the candle blew out, and the man died at sea. However, later in the Silent Hill Historical Society, the player can read the real version of the story. There was no storm, the candle never blew out, and in fact, the man in the story was misled by the light of the moon, which he mistook for the candle. Given that Maria initially tells her version of the story in a garden called Moonlight Grove, it is clear that Maria herself is the distraction, keeping James from rowing to his beloved on an island. Light plays an important symbolic role in Silent Hill 2, representing enlightenment or a realization of the truth. James realizes the truth on an island, which he is rowing towards throughout the game. Maria is the moonlight, a mere reflection or imitation of light, trying to distract him from ever reaching the shore. Pyramid Head has become synonymous with Silent Hill's violent and surreal atmosphere. More than just a grotesque monster, Pyramid Head serves as a manifestation of James's inner turmoil, acting as a twisted reflection of his own subconscious. James was originally intended to have split personalities, with one personality named Joseph, which we can find notes from Joseph still in the original 2001 Brookhaven Hospital. Some of the notes are from Joseph. And the other named James, which is, of course, James. The name Joseph was inspired by Joseph Barnett, a suspect in the Jack the Ripper murders. However, the concept of split personalities was later abandoned by Team Silent, and the character of Pyramid Head emerged as a manifestation of James's guilt and repressed desires. While there's quite a lot of debate about what is under Pyramid Head's helmet, or even if it is a helmet, or his head itself, Masahiro Ito, Pyramid Head's creator, has offered intriguing insights into the creature's symbolism. In a tweet, Ito revealed that he believes the being beneath Pyramid Head's helmet is, quote, another James. Other players of Silent Hill 2 have pointed out that Pyramid Head is the exact same height as James, and likely James has a similar build to Pyramid Head under his bulky coat. This interpretation aligns with the game's narrative, suggesting that Pyramid Head is a distorted representation of James's own identity. James often finds himself positioned directly in front of Pyramid Head, creating a mirror-like symmetry. This visual motif reinforces the idea that Pyramid Head is not merely an external threat, but an internal one, a projection of James's repressed desires and guilt. This is further emphasized by the way Pyramid Head seems to anticipate James's actions, as if reading his mind. James is also able to wield Pyramid Head's great knife, and when dragging the blade across the floor, he walks similarly to Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head only obtains the great knife, by the way, when James talks to Angela about suicide and obtains Angela's knife, which is tied to the game's in water or suicide ending. It is only when this idea is planted in James's head, the idea of self-harm or even suicide, that Pyramid Head becomes violent towards James. Before Angela's knife and the great knife, Pyramid Head is docile towards James and merely stares at him as though James is looking into a mirror, just as James looked at himself in the mirror at the beginning of the game. This shows that Pyramid Head is linked to James's psychological state. Pyramid Head's sadistic tendencies, such as torturing and murdering Maria, serve as a projection of James's own self-loathing and the violence he subconsciously associates with his actions. By inflicting pain upon others, Pyramid Head acts out the destructive impulses that James struggles to contain. Pyramid Head is more than just a monstrous antagonist. He is a symbol of James's inner turmoil, a manifestation of his darkest desires and deepest regrets. Next up, we'll be discussing psychological concepts associated with doppelgangers, and then we'll go over Gothic literature and Japanese folklore that feature doppelgangers, or doppelganger-like figures. And finally, we'll take a close look at some works that directly influence Team Silent, as indicated by interviews, the making of documentary, and the Book of Lost Memories. Sigmund Freud, born 1856, died 1939, was an Austrian neurologist and the father of psychoanalysis. Freud revolutionized our understanding of the human mind. His theories, including the unconscious mind, psychosexual development, and dream interpretation, have had a profound impact on psychology, literature, and culture. Freud's essay, The Uncanny, published in 1919, is a crucial place where he touches on ideas reminiscent of the shadow or doppelganger. In this work, Freud discusses the feeling of the uncanny as something both familiar and strange, often tied to repressed fears and desires. He uses the concept of the double, or doppelganger, as an example of this. Freud suggests that the double originates as a defense mechanism in early childhood, representing a desire for immortality and continuity. But as people mature, this double can become disturbing, embodying what is denied or repressed within the psyche. The doppelganger then becomes an uncanny reminder of our darker hidden selves. While both Freud and Jung, who we'll discuss shortly, focus on the darker aspects of the psyche, their approaches differ. Freud saw these repressed parts primarily as primitive drives, the id, which needed to be controlled or sublimated, whereas Jung saw them as potential aspects of the self that, if integrated, could contribute to a more complete and authentic personality. Where Freud was more focused on defense mechanisms and symptom management, Jung emphasized the importance of accepting and integrating these repressed aspects through the process of individuation. Freud's concepts of the id, repression, and the uncanny double bear a resemblance to Jung's shadow, though they differ in purpose and interpretation. Freud's work on the double and the uncanny helps us understand why confronting the repressed aspects of ourselves can feel so disturbing, akin to the unsettling encounter with a doppelganger. Carl Gustav Jung, born 1875, died 1961, was a pioneering Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst renowned for founding analytical psychology. His work, departing from Freud's, delved into the collective unconscious, a reservoir of shared human experiences and archetypes. Jung's shadow self represents the unconscious aspects of ourselves that we repress, deny, or simply aren't aware of because they conflict with our conscious self-image. This shadow contains everything we consider unacceptable, such as repressed desires, flaws, or traits we refuse to acknowledge. According to Jung, embracing and integrating the shadow can lead to personal growth, while denying it can cause it to manifest in harmful, unexpected ways. The idea of the doppelganger is closely aligned with the shadow because it externalizes these repressed traits as a literal other self. Many interpretations, especially in literature and art, use the doppelganger to explore how people wrestle with the darker sides of their personalities, often culminating in conflict or confrontation with the other self. While Jung didn't specifically address doppelgangers in his writings, he was deeply influenced by earlier thinkers, including Nietzsche, Goethe, and other philosophers and artists, who examined themes of inner darkness and duality. In literature and myth, the doppelganger's appearance has often been tied to these themes, which Jung considered essential to understanding the human psyche. His approach emphasizes integrating rather than fleeing from your dark twin. So next up, we're going to be talking about some short stories from Gothic literature. The first up is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson was first published in 1886 and introduced readers to a character torn between societal propriety and unbridled hedonism. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde are two sides of the same person, with Hyde representing Jekyll's repressed desires for indulgence and violence. This reflects in Silent Hill 2, in which James's guilt and unacknowledged desires manifest in various forms. Maria embodies his idealized memories of his deceased wife, Mary, yet with a tantalizing allure and flirtatiousness that Mary lacked in her last years. Just as Hyde serves as Jekyll's unshackled side, Maria acts as the idealized and sexualized version of Mary, a distorted reflection born from James's guilt and desires. Hyde embodies all of Dr. Jekyll's repressed impulses and violent tendencies, acting without restraint or remorse in ways Jekyll would never allow himself. Hyde's cruelty and lack of morality make him a dark, twisted mirror of Jekyll's hidden desires. Pyramid Head in Silent Hill 2 operates similarly as James's monstrous doppelganger, embodying James's latent violence and guilt in brutal, horrifying ways. However, Pyramid Head goes even further. Not only does he relentlessly torment James, but he also violently attacks other monsters within Silent Hill, revealing a predatory and territorial nature. This mirrors Hyde's chaotic disregard for boundaries, but also hints at a disturbing, deeply ingrained aggression within James. Pyramid Head's overt sexual aggression, visibly assaulting other monsters, reflects James' own repressed and conflicting emotions around desire, guilt, and punishment, making him a nightmarish figure that reveals the brutal consequences of unacknowledged inner darkness. Just as Hyde's actions escalate, driving Jekyll to destruction, Pyramid Head's violent behavior pushes James to confront the truths he has long denied, forcing him to confront the twisted aspects of his own psyche. Both characters underscore the Gothic horror theme that when inner darkness is left unchecked, it grows monstrous. Edgar Allan Poe's William Wilson, published in 1839, similarly explores the haunting presence of a double and the unrelenting tension between identity and morality. In this story, the protagonist is haunted by his doppelganger, a figure who seems to embody his moral conscience, shadowing him relentlessly until he ultimately succumbs to a climactic confrontation. This idea of an external conscience is echoed in Pyramid Head. Pyramid Head functions as James's executioner, punishing him for his hidden sins and forcing him to confront his actions. Just as William Wilson's doppelganger represents the protagonist's suppressed moral compass, Pyramid Head is the physical embodiment of James's guilt and his desperate need for punishment. While Pyramid Head reminds James of his moral failings, pulling him towards a confrontation with his own morality, Maria tempts James towards escapism, her seductive demeanor encouraging him to retreat from his guilt and indulge in an idealized version of Mary. Just as Wilson's double ultimately forces him to confront his own actions, Maria's presence compels James to face the truth about his repressed desires and his culpability in her suffering. In both tales, the doppelganger becomes a mirror of internal conflict, embodying the opposing aspects of the protagonist's psyches and driving them towards confrontation with their deepest, darkest secrets. So next up, we're going to dive a little bit into Japanese folklore. I'm going to try really hard to pronounce these correctly. I looked up how you pronounce them, but I have what is called stupid tongue, so we'll see how this goes. So the Japanese concept of rikonbyo, or soul separation sickness, refers to an ailment in which the soul or spirit separates from the body, causing the individual to experience a fragmented sense of self. In folklore, it's said that when someone suffers from rikonbyo, part of their soul can physically leave their body, manifesting as an apparition or a separate double of themselves. This phenomenon is believed to cause confusion, illness, or even death if the soul fails to reintegrate with the body. So kind of what Jung was saying earlier about that, if you don't learn to absorb the shadow, then you don't become a whole person. Much like a double in Japanese folklore, Maria serves as an echo of Mary, a representation of James's divided soul, manifesting his grief and guilt in physical form. As with rikonbyo, James's encounter with Maria embodies a separation sickness, where his longing and regret pull him further from reality and deeper into Silent Hill's nightmarish world. Maria isn't merely a vision, but a split part of James, one that interacts with him and reflects his own conflicted psyche back to himself. The Noperabo. Like I said, I'm going to try. The Noperabo, or faceless ghost, is another unsettling figure in Japanese folklore that embodies themes of identity loss and existential horror. Neperabo are humanoid entities with smooth, featureless faces who often reveal themselves to people in isolated areas. The facelessness of these creatures has been interpreted as a terrifying blankness, suggesting a lack of individuality, or more disturbingly, an erasure of one's identity. They often replicate living people, making them blank-faced doppelgangers. Pyramid Head and Silent Hill 2 share similarities with this creature from folklore, in the sense that he too is devoid of any defining facial features. While Pyramid Head is not literally faceless, his helmet obscures his visage entirely, leaving him an ominous and identityless figure. This mirrors the Noperabo's facelessness and aligns with his function as a blank judge and executioner figure that reflects James's suppressed guilt and darker impulses. I laughed because every time I pronounce one of these Japanese words, I have an index card here and I run my finger across the phonetic spelling, and I was just laughing at how I have to keep doing that. Much like the faceless ghost, Pyramid Head embodies a part of James that he cannot or will not acknowledge: his culpability in Mary's death and his repressed violence. The facelessness of both the Noperabo and Pyramid Head forces those who encounter them to confront a hollow aspect of their own identity, or to project onto these figures their own fears and hidden truths. So next up, we're going to talk about, these are forms of media that directly influence Team Silent. Like they directly have said that these influenced Silent Hill 2. So first up is Jacob's Ladder. Jacob's Ladder, released in 1990, is a psychological horror film that follows Vietnam War veteran Jacob Singer, who is plagued by disturbing hallucinations and flashbacks. As he descends deeper into a nightmarish reality, Jacob struggles to discern what is real and what is madness. In Jacob's Ladder, Jezzy, another name for Jezebel, by the way, just as Maria is another way to say Mary, acts as a distorted double of of Jacob's ex-wife Sarah, symbolizing the life Jacob has lost and his struggle to cope with his traumatic past. In contrast, Maria in Silent Hill 2 serves as a doppelganger of James's deceased wife Mary, embodying his repressed guilt, loneliness, and desire to escape painful memories of Mary's illness. Both women function as representations of memory and denial, illustrating how unresolved trauma can resurface in disturbing symbolic forms. Jezzy, whose name suggests Jezebel, as I said earlier, becomes a darkly seductive figure in Jacob's life, pulling him away from any attempt to confront his past. Her sultry and carefree personality contrasts with Sarah's warmth and stability, showing how Jacob has mentally distanced himself from his family-oriented life before the Vietnam War. While Jezzy and Maria seem on the surface to provide companionship and relief, they are ultimately catalysts for self-destruction. They act as antagonistic forces that prevent the protagonist from finding genuine resolution. In Jacob's Ladder, Jezzy's increasingly demonic appearance mirrors Jacob's deteriorating mental state and foreshadows his inevitable confrontation with his trauma. Her shifts in behavior and appearance are reminders of the internal battles Jacob is avoiding. Each disturbing transformation symbolizes the consequences of repressing his war memories, as Jezzy's alluring but increasingly terrifying figure becomes an obstacle to his inner peace. Maria's presence forces James to relive his buried emotions regarding Mary, but in an elusive, tormenting way that prevents true closure. In Silent Hill 2, Maria is often killed or harmed, representing James's inability to save his wife, a reminder of his failure and guilt. Maria exists to expose James's self-deception and make him confront his culpability in Mary's death. Both Jezzy and Maria serve as reminders that ultimately, denial cannot provide sanctuary from the truth. Instead, it only brings further anguish. Released in 1997, David Lynch's Lost Highway is a surreal neo-noir film that defies simple categorization. It follows jazz saxophonist Fred Madison as his life descends into a hallucinatory nightmare after receiving mysterious VHS tapes. The film blurs the line between dream and reality, identity and illusion, reflecting Fred's distorted perceptions of his own life. While imprisoned for the possible murder of his wife, Renee, Fred experiences a bizarre transformation, becoming another man named Pete, who soon begins an affair with a doppelganger of his wife, now named Alice. This fractured narrative structure mirrors Fred's fragmented psyche, with these doubles embodying his repression, guilt, and the darker truths he refuses to confront. Where Fred escapes into a new identity, James's mind traps him in a psychological hell. Lynch uses Fred's transformation into Pete, as well as the presence of the enigmatic mystery man, to explore fragmented identity. These shifting identities challenge the viewer's understanding of self and reality, underscoring Fred's compartmentalization in response to trauma. Like Fred's new, quote, wife in Lost Highway, who appears as an alluring version of his murdered wife, Maria represents a fantasy that allows James to escape temporarily from his guilt and grief. Both Lynch's film and Silent Hill 2 emphasize the instability of identity under the weight of trauma and guilt. In Lost Highway, the doubles, especially the mystery man, deepen the ambiguity, inviting viewers to question what is real and what is a projection of Fred's fractured mind. Meanwhile, the fog-shrouded town of Silent Hill symbolizes James's distorted mental state, immersing the player in his unreliable, skewed perspective. The psychological horror in both works arises from the doppelgangers, who externalize internal chaos and serve as unsettling reminders of repressed guilt. Junji Ito's Tomi is a horror manga series, the first installment being published in 1987, centered around the titular character Tomi. A hauntingly beautiful woman with a distinctive beauty mark, Tomi possesses an otherworldly allure that drives men to obsession and violence. Despite being repeatedly murdered and dismembered, Tomi inexplicably regenerates, spreading her curse and chaos wherever she goes. Tomi was created by Ito as a supernatural, manipulative beauty who defies death. Tomi's origins draw on folklore and psychoanalytic fears of duplicity and self-replication. Maria, unlike Tomi, is not consciously malevolent, but is instead a projection of James's psyche, shaped by his conflicting emotions. Both Tomi and Maria embody a seductive beauty that ensnares the men around them. Tomi's beauty is hypnotic and irresistible, leading to obsessive violence and jealousy. Men who encounter her are driven to destroy her, only for her to return again, feeding an endless cycle of violence and attraction. Her supernatural allure becomes a curse, bringing ruin to herself and others. Maria's appearance, resembling James's late wife, but with an added overt sensuality, makes her a perverse reflection of his desire. While she does not provoke violence directly to the same extent as Tomi, her existence continuously tortures James, rekindling his guilt and forcing him to confront his role in Mary's death. Tomi's character speaks to the horror of obsession and unending cycles of violence, revealing a nihilistic vision where beauty and desire are intrinsically destructive. Each replication of Tomi represents an undying trauma, a memory that cannot be erased. Tomi is infamous for her unsettling ability to return after death, regenerating herself even after being torn to pieces. This endless cycle of death and rebirth turns her into a horrifying figure of immortal beauty, sparking jealousy, violence, and obsession in those around her. Each resurrection represents an unresolved obsession that can never be purged, underscoring the terrifying thought of beauty that refuses to die. Maria serves as Silent Hill's way of forcing James to confront his buried memories. Maria's repeated deaths and resurrections in Silent Hill 2 echo these themes. After each death, she inexplicably reappears, forcing James to relive the unresolved trauma of losing his wife Mary and the complex emotions tied to that loss. Each time Maria dies and returns, James is haunted by the horror of his own choices, unable to break free from the guilt that defines his journey. Like Tommy, Maria's presence is a haunting one, impossible to fully comprehend or eliminate. Now I would like to discuss one final doppelganger in Silent Hill 2, which is, drumroll please, the game itself. The 2024 remake of Silent Hill 2 can be seen as a kind of doppelganger to the original 2001 iteration, a distorted but recognizable reflection that carries with it an eerie familiarity similar to the uncanny nature of the doppelgangers we've explored in this video. This idea goes beyond the updated visuals and expanded gameplay elements, suggesting that the remake itself can serve as an unsettling shadow of the original. Just as James and Maria experience strange deja vu throughout their journey, so too does the player, encountering familiar locations and scenarios only to notice slight, disorienting differences that make the experience feel both known and unknown. The characters' appearances have evolved. They look almost like the people we remember from 2001, but with subtle alterations that make them both recognizable and foreign. The uncanny effect of these changes are amplified by the 2024 version's visual fidelity, which creates hyper-realistic facial expressions and movements that make the characters somehow feel more human, but less like themselves. This has resulted in both praise and criticism from players, myself included, who have noted that the characters seem less wooden, but that this makes them seem not like themselves. These echoes are particularly evident in Maria's experiences throughout the game. Though she can't remember why she is terrified of certain hallways or rooms or Baldwin Manor, her reactions suggest that some residual memory of trauma from her 2001 counterpart persists, hinting at a cyclical experience of violence and horror. This is especially pronounced in a hallway scene where she appears visibly distressed, possibly subconsciously reliving her death at the hands of Pyramid Head, a scene that both she and longtime players remember. This remake thus becomes more than just an updated version. It exists as an uncanny double of the original, both revisiting and subtly rewriting the experiences within Silent Hill 2. This approach taps into the same horror of doppelgangers that drives the narrative within the game itself. A sense of being faced with something that feels almost identical to something we've known before, but is ultimately and uncomfortably different. Just as the town of Silent Hill serves as a mirror for James's mind, showing him darker versions of his thoughts and actions, the 2024 remake serves as a doppelganger for the 2001 game, revealing an experience both familiar and distorted, forcing players, new and old, to confront the game's unsettling past in a new, haunting form. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Let's Analyze Silent Hill 2. As I mentioned in the last video, the uploads of these will be sporadic since it does take much longer to write and create these videos than regular gameplay videos. For the next video, we'll be examining Silent Hill as Purgatory and whether the characters within are alive or dead. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.